What you guys, got another video here for you. In this one, we're taking a look at how to build a computer in 2021. Pretty straightforward and easy to do. If you've never built a PC before, then follow this video. It's pretty straightforward. So we're starting off with a computer case. This is the BitFenix Nova Mesh TG-SE ARGB version. This is their brand new release. So if you're looking for a really decent case, then the BitFenix case series is pretty good. We'll go with the 10th gen Core i5 in this one. The CPU cooler, we're going to use the Vetroo V5 Black Edition. This is ARGB fan on here as well. We're also going to be using a bunch of RGB fans from BitFenix. The FormulaMod cable extension kit is what I'm going to be adding to this one. This can be a really nice little way of adding some nice look to your case. And also we're going to go for the Kingston KC 2500 1TB and maybe the PMY 950 as well. The power supply is the Tough Gaming 650 watt, and we're going for the GeForce GTX 1660 Super. Now the memory is the Corsair Dominator Platinum, 32 gigabytes at 3200 megahertz speed, and the Gigabyte Z490 Vision D is what we're going for. The memory I had lying around, so I wanted to use it up, and the Vision D is probably a little bit overkill for that i5 processor, but I would like the silver effect on it to go with the Dominator Platinum, so I went with it, and I'll probably upgrade the chip a little bit later on to probably an i9 or an i7 or something like that. So let's get it out of the packaging here and put it onto the bench, and we can take a look at getting all of the CPU and RAM and all that sort of stuff installed. So the CPU is the 10th gen Core i5. This is the 10400F. This doesn't have the GPU built into it, which saves a bit of money because we're going to be using our own GPU, so we don't really need it. So all I need to do here is remove the CPU in the clamshell here, and we can put this to one side because that's what we're going to use. Now the cooler, we're going to discard this and use our own cooler, but you can use the coolers on here. They're pretty good. It's entirely up to you. But here we have our CPU. Just going to remove it from the protected clamshell here. And inside here, you're going to get your CPU. Now, there isn't any pins on here. Now, on the AMD processors, you'll probably find there is a load of pins on here, so you have to be a bit careful. But try not to touch the pads on here because you don't want to get no oily residue from your fingers on the pads here. You'll see a little notch on here as well, and there's a little triangle on here which matches up with a triangle on the board here. You can see it on the corner there on the bottom left. So we're just going to slot this in. I've already examined the board to make sure there's no bent pins, and all I need to do here is drop it into the slot and match it up. And just give it a little tiny wiggle. There we go, it's in. And we can now pull down the cover here and lift up the arm and just slot it underneath the little screw here. And now we can pull down the retention lever and make sure it's clipped underneath there. The little plastic part will pop off. Keep this safe just in case you have to RMA your motherboard or you want to sell your motherboard at a later date. So keep them to one side. Okay, so let's now move on to the NVMe drive here, which is going to be for our Windows and our storage. It's just held on with one screw here, and this will allow us to remove this plate here, and this gives us access to the M.2 slot. This is the Kingston KC 2500, and this will just slot into the M.2 slot on here. Now you'll see there's 3 bays here. You choose which one is the right one for yours. You can check your user manual which come with your motherboard. So I'm just going to remove this little screw here for the standoff where the drive will sit on and basically screw down into. So what we're going to do is remove that little screw there and put the drive into the slot, push it in. And now we can see it's like a little springboard. We just push this down and we can use the little screw, which we just undone, to screw back onto the standoff to make the drive nice and snug and keep it into position. And that won't move then once we've got the screw back on. So let me just screw this back down. And you can see that's in position. Now we get our plate again, which we took off earlier. And we're going to remove this little plastic covering. This is for the thermal pad, which is underneath here, which will keep the drive nice and cool. So I'm going to just slot this back in now. And we can just screw down the screw that we took off a little bit earlier on. So let's just screw this back down. And the drive is now done. It's in position. Very simple and easy to do. Okay, so let's move on to the next stage, which is going to be putting our CPU cooler on. This is the Vetroo V5 version here for our cooler. Now this is a cheaper aftermarket cooler. I wanted to give it a test to see what it was like. I can always upgrade a little bit later on, but make sure you choose which cooler you want. It does support Intel and AMD, and it supports a bunch of different sockets on there, so just choose the right cooler to suit your needs. Again, this is addressable RGB, this one here, so should get a nice little RGB effect on the fan. So we've chosen the right bracket for our CPU, so whether you've got an Intel or an AMD, you would use the right type of bracket. They are labeled on the packet, so you just choose the right one. And this is held on the bottom with 2 screws. So I'm just going to offer this up and basically screw the 2 screws in, and that will be the bracket in position. Can't be any more simpler than that. This design is pretty straightforward, so I'm just going to screw this down. And don't over tighten them, just get them sort of nice and snug in there and put all the other ones in. So you should see now it should look something like this once you've got this in position. I just need to repeat the process on the other side. And once that's screwed in, I can then just go down and just nip these up, make sure they're tight. Just don't over tighten them. Okay, just a little tiny little turn there. And now that's done. And this is a 5-pipe copper pipe cooler, which means it's going to be nice and cool for our CPU. So we've got a nice fan here. I think it's 120mm with anti-rubber vibration pads on here. And you can see the cabling on here as well, which is your 4-pin and your RGB. So this will go to your board as well for power and also for the RGB effect, which means you don't have to worry about trying to sync this up. It should be synced once you get this to the board here. Do all that later on. It does come with a little back plate here made of plastic, and for this sort of price point it's expected, but it would be nice to see a nice metal plate there. So you just put these into the right order. There's a little tiny numbers on there which tells you for the type of socket that you're using. Push it onto the back to test it. Once you're in good position here, just remove the sticky tape and basically push it on once you know you've got those yellow sliders in the right positions, and you can push these through the holes to make sure it's stuck down. This is why I prefer to use a proper countertop rather than a cardboard box, because obviously it just makes it much more easier. You can see that's now stuck to the back there, and which allows me to put it back down, and I can now screw straight into that. Okay, it's time for the compound here. I'm going to use the compound that come with the cooler, since it's there, so I might as well use it. And I'm just going to put a little teeny bit in the center like so, and that should be enough to spread out across the CPU heat spreader there. So it's just entirely up to you how much you use here. Just don't overdo it and don't underdo it. It's that simple. It's not that hard. You can spread it out if you wish. I'm just going to leave that as a little blob in the middle and just basically offer up the cooler here. Now I haven't put the fan on yet because I need access to the screws, which will make it much more easier. And I just need to screw down on each corner. It's that simple. So let me just get a screwdriver and screw this down. Now don't over tighten the first screw, and then go to the opposite corner here and tighten this one down. So don't go all the way down first time out, because what you'll find is you're going to have problems. And I'm just going to work my way to the next one and then the next one here. And you should hear them clicking, and that's pretty normal. And once you find there's a little bit of resistance there, that's normally where it stops. So just get these little fan clips here and put them into the back of the fan holes here. You can see them there. So just clip them in. And then we can offer this up to the cooler itself. This bit's a bit fiddly, but once you've got that in position, make sure your cables are in the right position that you want them, which is at the bottom for me. And then I'm just going to clip this fan on, and you should see there's a little tiny area where the clips will clip into the fan here, just like so. There we go. And that's it. That's in position, and that should hold the fan in position here. I'll show you close up here so you can see it. So it should hold on to the back area here, and you can see it's held into position here with the little fins, and the wire slips through those and holds it into position. You can move this up a little bit if you need to, if it's hitting the RAM. Let's plug in the 4-pin header here. So you should see 2 headers here, one CPU fan and one CPU option. you should be in the CPU fan. I did plug it into the CPU option here. I was too busy trying to get a close-up shot and actually plugged it into the wrong header. I did change it afterwards, but you should go into the CPU fan. Moving on to the next step, which is your RAM. So looking on the board here, you'll have maybe 2 slots or 4 slots, depending on what type of board you got. But look on the board and there'll be some markings on the board, and you need to make sure you plug the RAM into the right slots. Now you should check your manual and you should see a little notch on the RAM here. I went with this Dominator Platinum because I had it lying around, and it does look very nice with the chrome effect on the board as well. Now you can use RGB RAM if that's what you want to do. So I've got the correct clips on the slots pulled back, ready to insert the memory, and it's in this case it's these 2 slots here. So I'm just going to push these down and you should hear a click, and then once that's in position, that should be good to go. So move on to the next one here. Just marry up the little slot here onto the board, and away you go. It'll only go in one way, so just slot that down and push it down like so. There we go. You do need a bit of force, but you can see because we're on a nice hard surface here, we don't have any sort of bending of the board here. Now if you see, the motherboard standoffs are already pre-installed in this case, but there is 3 missing because we're using a full ATX motherboard, so I need to add 3 more in here. So let me go ahead and put these 3 in, and they just screw in, and you can tighten these down with a pair of pliers or a nice little socket tool, depending on what you have to hand, but just don't over tighten these, and make sure they're tight enough so the screw doesn't just spin around when you start tightening it down. Okay, it's that simple. So I'm just going to put 3 of these in. Make sure you got them in the correct order, and then you can offer up your board and slot this into position. That's a bit fiddly here. Now we've got no I/O shield here because it's already pre-installed on the motherboard. So I'm just going to slot this into position. Make sure there's no cables snagging there or anything like that. And once you've got it all lined up, we should be ready for screwing this down. So you can see here, I'm just going to screw this down into position. And I'm not going to bore you with every single screw here, so I'll just show you a few screws. Now this is 9 screws for this ATX board here, so I'm just going to be screwing those down. Sometimes there's a middle one missing because it's just a hole and there's a standoff already there, so you don't need to screw that one. There's many different variants for different types of boards, but they should be pretty much all very similar the way you screw them down. So I'm just going to screw these down with the correct screws. Now sometimes you might find this one I'm screwing in here is just a standoff and you don't screw it. It just depends. So moving on to the power supply here, you can see we're using the Tough Gaming power supply. It's not a modular power supply. It's the only one I could get really. But this is a 650 watt bronze gaming one. You can see plenty of power there for this graphics card that I'm using. And you can see there is a bottom filter there. So I will be facing the fan down. Now, again, whether you want to face your fan up or down will determine on how you're situating your PC, whether it's on carpet or whether there is a filter down on the bottom there. Obviously, you're not going to face it down if there's no filter there. So we're having ours down, and I'm just going to screw this into position with 1 screw. And I'll show you here on the back, there's just 4 screws. Nothing too complicated here. There's 4 of them here which you need to screw into. Very simple stuff. And it shouldn't take more than, a couple of minutes to get this in. Once you've got that into position, screw them down. And this will come with your case kit. You should have all the screws with your case kit. There's also probably some screws that will come with your power supply. There's sometimes a little packet in there with these screws. So I'm just going to screw this up. And once that's in position, we can move on to the next step. So you can see this PC build's coming along pretty nicely. And we'll move on to the next step here. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to use these extension cables here. These are pretty cheap, 25 bucks. For these particular types of cables, and to just add a little bit more class to the build, you can skip this bit if you want and just poke your cables through, but I'm going to be using these extensions with combs already on here. So let's go ahead and poke that through the hole in there. Now, to determine where you are on your build will determine where you poke the cables through. Sometimes it's a little bit lower or higher depending on what type of motherboard you're using, but this one I have to use the holes that are there and it's this one here. So I'm just going to poke that in and plug in the 24 pin into the board. That's simple. Can't be any easier than that. Now we've done that one, we can plug in our CPU one. Don't forget to plug this one in, otherwise you're not going to get the PC to boot. So make sure that's fully seated. Now moving on down to the bottom of the case, you should see some holes here. And I'm just going to be routing the cables here, which are your audio cable, and also you've got your USB 3.0 cable, and also your front control panel cables here. So I'm just going to be poking those through, and I'm going to plug all these in. So they just go in one way. I just slot this into position. And once that's done, we can move on to the USB, plug that in here. And that only goes into one part of the board. So I'm just going to slot that in. There's a little tiny nook on that. You just need to line it up. Now the front panel connectors here, you're not going to really see anything because my hand's going to be in the way. But if you look at the user manual or look online, you should see them here. And it's pretty straightforward. So let's move on to the next stage here. I'm going to put a couple of fans up the top of the case here. So up the top is an area for 2 fans here. Now you can also put up the top here a 240mm rad if you want to, but I'm going to be putting the 2 RGB fans here. These are addressable fans, which I'm going to put up here to add a bit more RGB up the top. You can skip this area if you wish and just leave it blank. It's entirely up to you. Just going to feed these cables through, get the 2 fans up on top and balance them here, and then screw them into position. Now where you position these is entirely up to you. They should come just a little bit forward so they don't cause any problems here. Now if you are going to be using a radiator up the top here, just make sure that you can get the radiator in with the fans and make sure it fits inside your build. So you need to check all the dimensions of your case and your radiator to make sure it does fit. And you can see here it will be quite a squeeze if I added a radiator in here. So it will come down quite far. So just bear that in mind if you are using some sort of closed loop water cooled system. Okay, so let's move on to the next bit, which is our graphics card. So I'm just going to remove the screw here for this top panel. And why they didn't make all of these expansion slots here with screws in them, I don't know. Basically what they've done is they've got the breakaway ones, which cuts down cost, I should imagine. But I don't like it, and it's a real pet hate of mine, because once you start breaking these off, you can't put them back. And, you know, it's a real big downer to see these on cases in 2021. But again, it's just a cheaper option for them to do that. And you can see you have to break these off. And it's a bit of a nightmare to get these off sometimes. I think the motherboard is holding this into position here. So I'm just going to have to keep wiggling this backwards and forwards and get this off. Now, if you are buying a case like this, or you're looking to buy a case and this is a deal breaker for you, then don't buy them. But I mean, at the end of the day, we should be just having the removable ones with a screw. It's very simple. And you can see you have to break this off to get it open. So just make sure you break the right ones off, because otherwise you're going to end up with a gaping hole there. So we're going to put our 1660 Super in here. And I've just realized it's a Gigabyte one. So we've got a Gigabyte board and a Gigabyte card. So we're just going to slot this in and screw it down with the 2 screws. And this should just hold it up just a little bit here, just to take the weight off. And that's now done. And I'm just going to put the second screw in and then put the holding plate here. And this just held in with one little screw. I'll just show you here so you can see. And that just covers that little hole there. Very simple. So that's the graphics card in. Just got to give the graphics card a bit of power. So again, this does come with the colored cables in the kit. It has the CPU and also the 24 pin and the GPU, 2 GPU ones. And you can choose whatever colors you like. And they do have the combs on these. For $25, it's not too bad. I'm just going to poke this through and then plug that into the correct cable. And we should be pretty much there. Just got to install Windows and get it all set up. And I'll show you what the end result looks like once we get this into position. So let's take a quick look. And there she is, the finished result. Not too bad. Looks pretty nice. for a tidy little build. And again, if you're looking to build a PC in 2021, pretty straightforward and easy to do. There's nothing too difficult about building PCs. You just need to choose the right parts for your build. And again, I could have had RGB RAM in here, but I do think it's just enough RGB, I think, now for me. I just sort of toning it down just a little bit in 2021. And I think the overall look of this build is pretty nice. You can use whatever color scheme you want in your build, and that's the sort of results you can expect. Now, I'll leave all the links for the parts that I used in the video description. Now, what I will say, if you're choosing parts for yourself, then just be mindful that the motherboard I used here was a $300 motherboard, which is quite a lot of money for an i5 processor. So in general, I wouldn't generally do that. I just did it because I like the look of the board with the effects on it. But normally, if I'm building something to order or something to a certain price point, then I would choose all my parts accordingly. But the same thing with the RAM. It's quite expensive RAM for an i5 processor, and again, it's 32 gigs. You don't really need 32 gigs of RAM to run a gaming system, but you get the general idea on how to build a PC by following along with this video. Pretty straightforward and easy to do. If you need help with picking parts for your PC, then join our Discord server. Tell us your budget and we can do our best to help you pick the right parts for your build. Anyway, I just want to say a big special thanks to all my YouTube members who have joined my YouTube members group. Your names are going up on the screen right now. A big thank you for you for showing the support. My name has been Brian from briteccomputers.co.uk. Now, just remember, this is a how to build a PC. You can use whatever parts you like. Again, these parts were just used to show you how to build a PC. Again, use the right parts for your build that suit each other, and you should be able to have a PC that looks something like this. Anyway, thanks again for watching. Bye for now.